Good morning, it's Dr. Rapiti. Welcome to another video. It's Friday the 2nd of September 2022, and today I want to talk about a few things. And the first one is the efficacy of natural immunity, which there's no doubt about. But here's another big study that comes from Portugal, and they have a massive, it's based on their data. Portugal is a highly vaccinated country with almost 90% vaccination. It's a population of 9 million people. And the study that was done, it was done based on the data. It was a retrospective. In other words, they looked back into the data and followed the individuals up. And in that study, they included something like 5 million people in that data, and it was pretty accurate. There's something called a p-value, which tells you the confidence level of that study was very good. It was 0.001 or something to that effect, but it was a very good and makes the evidence acceptable. The object of the study was to see if you've had a previous infection, what are your chances of being protected against Omicron 5? I think that's important. If you had a previous infection dating back from 2020 with the Wuhan strain and the Delta strains and the Omicron strains, the Beta strains, what was your chances or level of protection against Omicron 5? And this is what they came up with. If you had the Wuhan strain, then you had a 55% protection chance of not getting Omicron 5, which shows that's pretty good immunity. Remember that the Wuhan is almost 2 years against the Omicron 5. If you then have the Alpha infection, well, that was also in 2020 or 2020, then it was 58% protection. You can notice with each strain it is now increasing. And if you had the Delta strain, which was a very virulent strain, suddenly your protection against getting Omicron 5 was 64%. And if you had BA1 and 2, it was even better. Your chances of protection was 76%. That was what the figures given, that people who had BA1 and 2 had, there was a 76% chance of people getting less infected. In other words, 76% had good immunity against BA5, which proves quite conclusively that natural immunity is very effective, very long-lasting. So regardless of what one says, one cannot discount the benefits of natural immunity to protect society against this virus, which incidentally I still maintain is not a deadly virus if treated properly. It's just being made a song and dance by the pharmaceutical companies and their lackeys or their salesmen as professors. The next interesting thing I'd like to share with you is that in Ontario, Canada, the leading cause of death was unexplained adult sudden deaths. Now, we know that there's no such thing as unexplained deaths. It is only unexplained if there's no autopsy investigations. And what are the symptoms for it? You're perfectly normal 1 minute, and suddenly you drop dead. We've heard of a famous actress at the age of 32 dying suddenly. She had a standing ovation in the Cannes Festival for 8 minutes, saying that she's a future star, but unfortunately she's going to be a star no more. The same thing with lots of sportsmen and women who died suddenly. What about the 2 marathon runners for the first time? 2 top marathon runners in this country. I think it was in the Soweto Marathon or one of the marathons. 2 of them died suddenly, and 10 of them had to be taken into intensive care. So there seems to be a higher incidence of heart problems or sudden deaths amongst the vaccinated. And in England and Wales, evidence is showing from their data that there's 1,000 excess unexplained deaths. So that's the new disease of this era of post-vaccine. And they are arguing, yes, of course, that there's no correlation and it's coincidental. Really, people who are healthy and normal dying suddenly is coincidental? Surely that would call for an investigation. The third point I want to talk about is the way the UK accepted the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. They used this a figure of, they enrolled about 43,000 people into their study. They divided them into two groups. The one had the vaccine, the other had the placebo, so it was a good number. And what was the results? In the vaccinated group, 8 did not develop severe infection, and in the unvaccinated group, 28 got severe infection. On that alone, they made the decision that the vaccine protects you. My big question as a frontline doctor, how does it protect you? There's a lot missing in this data. I'm not a big data analyst, but I'm forced to analyze some of these figures because I can speak from hard evidence, and I will challenge the basis upon which they did this. Yes, they might have had 8 cases of severe cases in the vaccinated group. What about the plethora of adverse events, the heart attacks, the kidney failures, the sterility? But in the placebo group, no such thing occurs. In my 2.5 years, I've treated really very severe patients, far more severe than they've had, and I've not had one major severe adverse event that would compare with the vaccines. So I don't think it's a big price to pay to get an infection. And when they talk of severe, we need to understand what is meant by severe. They don't explain what is severe. Does it mean hospitalization? I think the benchmark should have been mortality. Does it save mortality? And no such thing is mentioned. So by all accounts, I don't think this was a fair way to accept a vaccine. It is unacceptable, especially when you know the tremendous side effects of these drugs. The next thing I want to talk about, the UK has accepted a bivalent vaccine, and that is they're using the old strain with the Omicron. Now, it doesn't make sense to me. Why would you use an old strain? I mean, that old strain is dead and gone. The danger is that you're putting 2 types of spike proteins. You're probably doubling your risk of adverse events. It's the most stupid thing I've ever heard. That since when an old strain reincarnates itself? I know human beings claim that they do, but viruses? Hell no. I mean, that was the case, and every time you had influenza virus, by now, if you had 10 different strains, you would have to have 10 different types of vaccines. We all know that's absolute rubbish. It makes no sense. And why would you want to get an Omicron vaccine when there is minimal death, hardly any deaths, no hospitalizations, no complications, and extremely good recovery from it? Again, it's big. And furthermore, this Omicron strain was not gone through any rigorous testing at all. None whatsoever. It was merely accepted on the basis the first one went through, so you accept the second one. That's not signed, not acceptable. And lastly, I want to talk about a Norwegian study, and that is retrospective, 23 million people, a very good data study, where they found that there was a high incidence of myocarditis in young adults. And in the first dose, the incidence was 2 to 9 for 100,000 people who got myocarditis. And with the second dose, the incidence increased from 2 to 9 to 9 to 28. That's almost 300 to 400% increase by the second dose. You can just about imagine what would happen with the booster. Remember, each time you're giving a dose of this vaccine, you're stimulating an autoimmune response. And that is what's actually causing the myocarditis. And 8 out of the 10 people who had myocarditis eventually died, according to one study in the US. So I fail to understand why Rhodes University, with all this information at their disposal, is still insisting on a vaccine mandate, and a vaccine that does not work on this current strain and leaves you with a severe myocarditis. Who is going to take the rap? Definitely, it's not based on science. Am I to believe those who accuse these institutions of being bribed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for making this irrational and dangerous decision? I leave you to think about that one. Thank you, Dr. Rapiti.